Greetings and welcome to another Warhammer 40,000 kill team video. Today, where I'm going over what teams should be, well, need nerfs and buffs based on the recent stats for the upcoming Balance Dataslate, which should be end of June. But before we get into things, please remember to like and subscribe as well as comment. Let me know what you thought of this video. Do you agree or disagree? Anything I missed? I remember that I have a Discord you can check out in the episode description below, as well as an affiliate link at Element Games and a Patreon if you want to give me some more support. But yeah, considering this has become a trend, I will just talk about based off of the stats, because I just released the stat show for May, and using their April and May data, I'm going to suggest what balance changes kill team needs, because hopefully we should get a balanced data slate at the end of June and be interesting. I might have been right a bit before, but this is more just for fun, for fun. So I'll be mainly addressing teams that are basically overperforming, so with a win rate of 55% or higher, higher than 55%, sorry, or below 45% or 44% more realistically. But yeah, so if you haven't watched the May stat show, you can watch it there because I cover both months, but let's get into it. And I'll go the kill teams that need buffs, nerfs first, then the buffs. So remember, this is based off the stats. It's nothing personal. I am going to miss out factions that I would personally change, but there's no real data for it. And you have to remember, it's not just off the data alone. It is a shame we don't have placement data still, because that would help make the win rates make more sense. But we know Games Workshop use win rate data as a guide, along with basically their playtesters to guide what needs to be nerfed or buffed. So yeah, let's just get into it. Oh yeah, and one last change is loot should... See, I'm in an R about loot being lootable, each objective being lootable an extra time, or not being able to loot turning point 1. And I think not being able to loot turning point 1 makes the game more interesting, but I can see why people would want loot, being able to loot every turn. But yeah, I think loot needs changing to mirror capture and secure. I'm of the mindset that if you can't loot turning point 1, it makes the mission really fair to play and stops this alpha rush that can warp the game and turning point 4 be nothing. But I can also see the benefit of having each objective lootable 4 times to mirror capture and secure. But personally, I prefer not being able to loot turning point 1, but I would also be happy to see being able to loot objectives up to 4 times. But those are just, that's what I'd just say for that mission. So, I mean, here are the May stats, if in case you missed it, the April-May combined stats. So it's kind of a fusion of GT Plus and normal results. But first, let's go with Gellerpox Infected. They literally have spent 6 out of 7 months with a greater than 60% win rate. The only month they didn't have that higher win rate was when I think it was the December Warhammer World Tournament, because we had 6 to 8 Gellerpox players, and the best player did 2-2 there. Most of them did 1 win, 3 losses, or 4 losses, right? Because there's no doors, basically, and the boards were too dense for them, so they just couldn't play on them. It's kind of a joke a kill team like this has been performing so well for so long. I've heard a lot of people argue oh, they're fine in my area, we know how to beat them. And I was like, that's great. That's great for your local meta, right? Globally, they're not doing well balance-wise. So my first balance change would be Rust Emanations going from 1 CP to CP 1+. So basically, it's 1 CP the first time you use it, then it's 2 the next, and 3, and so on. So effectively, if you're using it every turn from turning point 2, it will cost you a maximum of 3 command points at the end of in turning point 4, right? Then we just make Nightmare Hulks have a 6-up DPR. It's kind of ridiculous they have a 5-up DPR because they have 18 wounds. Now, it doesn't just add a third of their wounds, because you can make your DPR rolls, so damage prevention rolls, on the wounds you've saved. So effectively, they're not 18, they're more 27 wounds. And you can argue there's 4 of them and it's hard for them to get cover, but that's just too many wounds, and which is why damage prevention rolls are bad in general and really shouldn't be in kill team. A 6-up DPR is tolerable because it's a lot rarer to trigger. I mean, in my opinion, Nightmare Hulk should have had something like -1 damage if your weapon does 5 or more damage, you know, so it doesn't penalize the small arms weapons or something like that, you know, or make it the reverse, like weapons that do 3 or less damage are -1 to represent, you know, that you need bigger weapons to kill them. But just make them a 6-up DPR and Rust Emanation CP 1+. And I think that's all you need to do to this kill team, and they're fine. They still have like 15 bodies, the most wounds in the game. They're still really hard to deal with, but a 6-up DPR makes them fairer to play against, and Rust Emanations basically just stops you spamming at every turn. And I generally think making a lot of stratagems do CP 1+ is a great fix, which they've introduced to a lot of factions. But that's what I'd do for Gellerpox. Now we've got Void Dancer Troupe, a faction that has persistently had like 57% or 60% every month, and somehow dodged the last Balance Dataslate, despite doing just as badly in terms of overperforming for a variety of reasons. Who knows why Games Workshop decided to not nerf Harlequins? But they are a problem. Once again, it's like, you know, they're fine in my meta. And I was like, that's great. They are still doing well from tournaments I know, because I know they've won several tournaments, and it's not just like a localized event. They are still very good because they all fly. Now, instead of just like properly balancing them and designing them properly like they should have been in the beginning, I think Void Dancer Troupe, the way you fix them, you make the support grip 2 equipment points, like anything more than 1, right? The rumor going around is the reason it's 1 equipment point is because playtesters didn't like having 1 equipment point spare. Who knows what that is? Either way, make the support grip 3 equipment points or 4 equipment points or 2, anything more than 1. Simple fix. Then for Sadefs, they don't get a free command point for completing the Sadefs, and Sadefs you need to do 5 instead of 4, and I think that's fine, because, you know, people may go, oh, but, you know, the reward for doing the Sadefs is the command point, and I was like, the reward for doing the Sadefs is that it triggers your whole team. That's the incentive. So all your operatives with all these rules get even more rules, right? So they don't need the extra command point, and I think that would be a good fix. You could argue if they don't change the Sadefs, like, so they definitely need support grip doing like costing more than 1 equipment point, no command points from the Sadefs, and I would probably make Segaratch's Jest CP 1+, because that stratagem is just dumb. Like, yeah, if you're like me who can always roll crits, cool, Segaratch's Jest does nothing. Otherwise, it still shuts down kill teams, like lots of kill teams. It's not a well-balanced stratagem at all. It needs a complete rewrite, but I think making it CP 1+ and then removing the free CP you get from Sadefs and making support grips more than 1 equipment points would be fine. Like, once again, making more stratagems like, oh, they're really powerful in a one-off usage, but the more you use them, the more powerful they get. And I think that's fair, right? It makes Harlequins more CP intensive, but the good thing is you're taking away the extra CP they generate because they have really good stratagems, so they should be punished for spamming them. But I think those changes would be enough. Like, the big problem is they're still free APL would fly, and they just delete Marines. But once again, like, to properly fix Harlequins, you need to completely rewrite them, which isn't going to happen. So next, we have Farstalker Kinband. So they actually did really well in May, but they did so well in May, it's boosted them overall, because even in April, they were doing pretty good. And I think it's due to a complication of factors. Like, we're seeing Into the Dark being played a lot less, especially as we wind up for Season 3. It's mainly due to crit ups, right? The Farstalker Kinband are in a good place, but the main thing that makes them kind of really hard to deal with is because of how they abuse, like, tac ops. So the first thing is, I would change their stratagem that lets them pick any other tac op archetype to only picking tac op archetypes they can select. Because the biggest thing is you literally go, I take balance the books, so I get one victory point every time I max one of my tac ops, and I need at least more than half of my kill team alive. And then they take recover item because they can take recon, and then they spend a command point to take implant. So they max implant turning point 2, they max recover item turning point 2, and suddenly at the end of turning point 2, they max balance the book. So that at the end of turning point 2, they have 6 tack up points, and then they just play to stall. And that's really hard to deal with. So I think one easy fix for that is just limit them to picking one of their archetypes. So they're just locked into picking Seek and Destroy and Recon. Those are still great archetypes, but it prevents them from doing the mess of, as I said, just abusing tac ops they can't normally pick to break balance the books, oddly enough. And then if you wanted to go a little bit further, I think I would errata bound. So instead of minusing white every time you traverse, drop, or climb, just change it to the first time. And I think that will help a lot, because you don't really see it too much on Into the Dark, but on Open it makes them kind of crazy. And I think on reflection, making that just the first time they either climb, traverse, or drop, reducing that by white is a lot fairer to play against, because there's still 12 operatives, and I like the buffs they have already. I think those changes would just make this kill team really solid to play. Finally, we have Veteran Guardsmen. So I've been talking about Veteran Guardsmen for months. I think the easiest burst forward, like the first thing you do, is you make the spotter ability not work if you're behind heavy cover. So normally the spotter can see anyone. You pick someone else to activate, and you nominate an enemy operative. They count as having an engage order, and you can shoot them for free. I still think that's a good ability, but to make it harmonize with all other concealing reveal abilities that aren't super close range, just make it not work behind heavy cover. So there's some counterplay. Because at the moment, on some boards, you literally just go, if you don't have access to super conceal, you just go, well, the Vet Guard player is just going to delete one of my operatives and I have nothing I can do about it. So I think that's an important play. And then if Games Workshop wanted to go further, this is something I talked about a lot with Charles, but I think, because Charles used to play the ancillary support as if they couldn't take equipment because he thought they were just extra guys. And then when I told him, no, you actually can, he was like, oh my gosh. So I think if ancillary support couldn't take equipment, that would be a huge change for the team. My justification is they're not actually part of your kill team. They're more just your extra equipment, like extras. You can either choose to take them or airstrikes. So to balance out getting 4 extra guys every game, don't let them take equipment, because it stops you having the like compulsory crack and frag trooper who just run up and just over trade with stuff. So I think first they have to change the spotter. That is like the first thing they need to do. Make it not work against people behind heavy cover, because that's just a general gameplay rule. And then if Games Workshop wanted to go further, just make sure ancillary support can't take equipment. Because all of a sudden, if you want to take that crack on frag, you have to put on someone else that's more valuable. Maybe you start taking like the guy with the combat arm as your crack grenade caddy because he's a 5-up DPR, stuff like that. I think it would make it more interesting and maybe encourage people to actually not run 14 Guardsmen all the time and promote some like in-faction harmonization, you know, that kind of stuff. But those are the only teams that I would say need nerfs, even though deep in my soul there are other teams I want to talk about. But if we're using the data as a guide, those are the 5 teams we'd cover: Gellerpox Infected, Farstalker Kinband, Void Dancer, Troupe, and Veteran Guard. All right, so let's get on to the buffs. We've done the nerfs, buffs. So once again, we're looking at 44% and above, because, you know, we rate draws less. With GW's own stats, they probably rate draws as 1 point, where we rate them as half a point. So on someone like 43 or 44, it's probably on 45, which is fine. And remember, those above are probably a lot worse. But Hunterclade overall for May and April did underperform in GT+, but actually were fine overall. So I think they'll be okay. They're still a really good kill team. I think they just had a really bad May. Right, they were doing so well in April and just suddenly dropped a bit, and it kind of affected them only for big tournaments like GT+, so 4-round and 16-player more tournaments. Otherwise, they were still doing pretty well. Then you have Hand of the Archon. They're in kind of a similar position. So I would say, you know, based on the stats on GT+, they probably need a buff for Into the Dark, but overall, they're actually doing pretty good. Let's tackle the big one, Pathfinders. So people are really upset that me, a Pathfinder veteran, said Pathfinders don't need buffs. Because the issue is we can't separate on the stats, right? because the Pathfinders have been consistently underperforming, but the issue is it's likely due to Into the Dark, and with Into the Dark going away, they will do a lot better. And if you suddenly buff them, they will probably dominate on open. So they probably will get a buff because it's fate. I guess it's like the monkey's paw thing, right? I don't think they should go back to 13 operatives. I'm not sure how you buff them without breaking them, but I think an interesting way to buff them would be to buff the weaker drones, make the other drones, like, so the non-marker guy, the non-marker gun and recon drone and shield drone, just make those other drones better, you know, and I think that would be enough. I really don't want to see them going up to 13 operatives again. Any other kind of buff would probably break the faction, and it's funny because it's like it's weird. They do struggle against some of the newer teams, but it's more so because those newer teams need nerf, but it's also Into the Dark, right? So it's really hard to say, and I generally don't know how to buff Pathfinders without breaking them. So my suggestion is just buff the weaker drones no one takes. Something like that, right? Let's find the middle ground there. I personally don't think they need any buffs. I think the moment Into the Dark goes away, they'll dominate the game again. Well, not dominate, they'll do really, really well. So, yeah. Now, we'll go on to the Exaction Squad. So the RBTs, they actually have this interesting trend where they've been doing great at 8 player to 16 player 3-round events, but they struggle at large events. But they need help, right? So the way I would buff them, they all need to go to 8 wounds. Let's just accept they all need to be 8 wounds because they don't have any group activation shenanigans. So everyone 8 wounds. That's the first thing. Stun battens should all be, they should have stun, right? And I think they should be lethal 4+, right? And the reason I'm saying the stun baton should be lethal 4+ is because you have 3 attacks hitting on 4s and, okay. Lethal 5-up, right? So stun, lethal 5-up. So they're 3 attacks. Everyone has stun batons, and it just makes them useful, right? So 8 wounds and stun batons with stun and lethal 5-up, right? That's just a blanket thing. Then for all the gunners, I would give them a special rule, like, I don't know, stop or my mum will shoot, close eradication, something like that. So when they shoot at someone within red, they get +1 ballistic skill, because they're good at shooting people up close, right? That's what the police do. But it basically makes their gunners ballistic skill better, right? So your Weber would go to ballistic skill 2 if they're within red of a target. Your grenade launcher goes to ballistic skill 3. And your heavy stubber, if you somehow, for some reason, decide to take it, goes to ballistic skill 3. I would also just make the dog hit on freeze, just in case you only want to buy 1 dog. And one more thing is the shield guys. So I think the shield guys are really good, but I would give the non-parry profile, so the profile that parries first, leave that as is, but leave the normal attack profile, just give it +1 to hit. So you have this nice trade-off of, do you parry first or do you attack more accurately? And I think that would be a fair trade-off. It is a lot of buffs, but I think that would help the team overall. So to summarize for Exaction Squad, everyone to 8 wounds, stun battons, lethal 5-up with stun on all stun battons. Then I would make gunners +1 ballistic skill at red range. Oh yeah, the sniper, just make it BS2+. The sniper should just be BS2 up. And then if you want to go a little bit further, you make all shield attacks that are the non-parry profile +1 to hit. So they hit on freeze, but the parry first profile still hits on 4s. You know, and I think with those changes, the kill team's fine. They're still, it gives them some tools to fight against elites without making elites auto lose against them, but it just gives them a nice bunch of tools and durability. And I think that would be great for Exaction Squad, because even then you still want to buy 2 boxes, and that's the downside of this kill team. You know, at least making the dog hit on freeze helps if you just buy 1 box. Next we have Warp Coven. They're in a weird place where they're doing better just on GT Plus results, but they're not doing well overall. And I think Warp Coven is a simple fix. You just give them +1 operative. So they can either take an extra rubric or 2 extra Zangors. And I think that would just fix that kill team. because they do feel like prototype legionary in a way. And I think just letting them take an extra rubric or 2 extra Zangors would be enough. And I think that's all that kill team needs. Pretty simple. And, you know, I don't think anyone's going to complain of getting extra operatives. So that would be great, especially as they're APL2 Marines, right? It gives more synergy for the kill team. Now we come to a special part I like to call Honourable Mentions. So first one is Novitiates. Before we get on, they did fine over, like, not overall, but better at big tournaments. So I think that balances them out, so they're fine. But for Honourable Mentions, this is more where I can predict the future and see certain things as a big problem where maybe they might get addressed in the next Balance Dataslate, or more likely in a future Balance Dataslate, because there may be factions that you think need to be addressed that I haven't mentioned. So let's start off with the Gallowfall kill teams, because basically Gallowfall only released about 2 months ago, so Games Workshop are very unlikely to do any changes to something released so soon, even though everyone can see both kill teams are a problem. So for example, Felgor's Ravagers, they should, like, Frenzy, if they do any changes to Frenzy, if they just want to do one change, make sure you can't score tac ops or control objectives while you're frenzied, or even just can't control objectives while you're frenzied. That'd be fine. But I don't think anything's going to happen to Felgor's Ravagers. Like what happened in November, December, where, you know, what's their name? Before the last Balance Dataslate, where the Breachers just dodged everything, but everyone around them got buffed because they were released too soon, probably. I don't think Felgor's Ravagers will be touched, but if they are, they definitely need to not be able to contest and control objectives while frenzied, and also can't score tac ops while frenzied. And I think that would probably help keep that kill team slightly in check. Frenzy is still too good, but I don't think Games Workshop will touch them. The same with Hearthkin Salvagers. They did quite badly for May. And personally, I would like to give them all +1 wound, so they're all 8 wounds base. And not only does a grudge token give you a guaranteed crit, if you're shooting at someone with a grudge token, you get +1 to hit, right? So grudge tokens are so rare, and it synergizes what they do with 40k. It may be too good, but I would be happy for them to get 8 wounds, so everyone gets +1 wound. And then if they wanted to go extra far, Games Workshop could make, if you shoot at someone with a grudge token, you get +1 ballistic skill to a maximum +1, you know? But once again, I don't expect the Hearthkin Salvagers to be touched. They won't get any mobility. This is the downside of having movement increments of white. Like if they were 5 black, so 5 inches, that'd be fine. But yeah, as I said, I think they just need some extra wounds, and then grudge tokens slightly helping their accuracy would be fine. Maybe overkill, but at least they need +1 wounds. But those two factions, I don't see anything happening to them. And then we have Chaos Cults and Inquisition, who are also definitely going to be problems going forward. So Inquisition is quite easy to fix. For Absolute Authority, it's a very broken stratagem. Like, it's fine in a vacuum, but then you realize it shuts down too many kill teams. Like, even just to mention Hierotech Circle. Hierotech Circle cannot beat Inquisition because Absolute Authority just turns off reanimation every turn. So they can't really use reanimation, especially if they lose the Scarab first. I think what they have to do going forwards is make Absolute Authority once per game. I thought about making it 2 command points, but it's too good. But at least making Absolute Authority once per game lets it still be really powerful, but you have to know when to use it, right? So it's still 1 CP, but you have to time it right, and I think that's fine. Also going forward, if Inquisition get like a crazy win rate and like they start dominating events, the kill team should be limited to a maximum of 2 plasma weapons, so they can't take 3 plasma weapons. It's something I saw in Hand of the Archon, where they're limited to 2 dark light weapons instead of 3, and I think that makes sense. This kill team kind of having 3 plasmas is a bit silly, but once again, I think that's more you'd need to see them actually dominating events. The thing they definitely need is Absolute Authority just being once per game, just so it's fairer to play against, because there's some teams who have been designed and balanced around their ploys, which them just getting turned off every turn can't compete with, right? So I think that would be simple. And then we go into Chaos Cults, who are also like definitely going to be a problem. As I said, I would already make mutants have a 6-up DPR like the Gellerpox Infected do. I would probably go further and spread that onto torments. And then like it's really a case of how much will this kill team dominate the game. Like firstly, mutants definitely need to be a 6-up DPR. You can argue maybe downgrading them from Relentless to Ceaseless, but I think they just need a 6-up DPR. And I would probably change the Torment's DPR from 5-up to 6-up. And then if they were actually crazily dominating the game, maybe looking at the Icon Arch, like making its ability, you pick one of those abilities to trigger, so either the extra damage or the extra damage negation, or make those abilities only affect devotees, right? So it would make sense that the buffs to damage and damage negation only work against devotees. But we'd need to see the kill team really overperforming. I think the standout thing is just the damage, like the damage prevention rolls, because if you only ever had a maximum of 3 torments during the game and 5 mutants, it would be kind of okay. But you could potentially have 5 and 3 every turn. So I think they definitely need to make this DPR 6-up. And then if the kill team is dominating, you make the Icon Arc abilities only work for devotees, because it kind of makes sense they would be buffed. Or you could say anything that isn't a mutant or torment. But I think it would make more sense for the devotees because they're so like indoctrinated into the cult. But those are my honorable mentions, and it's one of the unfortunate times when you have factions released too soon towards a balanced data slate, but you can really tell they're going to be broken, right? Or really underperform. But yeah, overall, those are my buffs, nerfs. So once again, for the nerfs, summarizing, so Gellerpox go down to 6-up DPR, Rust Emanations is +1 CP, so it costs 1 but more every time you use it. Farstalker Kinband, they can, with their tactical ploy, they can only select tac ops of their archetype, so they can't select everything, and Bound is limited to the first time you climb, traverse, or drop. Void Dancer Troupe, you make Segaratch's Jest, CP 1+, you make support grips, equipment 2 points or more, and you don't get an extra CP for Sadefs. And then for Veteran Guardsmen, the spotter can't work against people behind heavy cover, and if they wanted to go further, ancillary support can't take any equipment. And then for buffs, Pathfinders buff the weaker drones, like do something to make the undesirable drones better to take. Exaction Squad, you make them all 8 wounds, so they all get +1 wounds, except the dog, right? Stun batons are lethal 5-up with stun. The gunners all get +1 ballistic skill if they're within red of the target. The sniper is just flat out ballistic skill 2+. And then also you make the non-parry profile of shields +1 to hit. So generally they'll go freeze to hit normally, force to hit if they want to parry first. And then finally for Warp Coven, I would make them get an extra operative. So you can either take 1 additional rubric or 2 additional Zangors. Those are pretty much it. The honorable mentions I'll leave alone for that section, right? They're more of a, I can see the future. But I think with those changes, you would have a nice substantial change in the meta. Because if you think about it, Harlequins basically hunt Marines. They really love Marines, and they're really good at hunting Marines. Plus they're also free APL and fly. Gellerpox have just been a persistent problem. Farstalker Kinband, I think it's mainly just the power of crit ops and the change from Into the Dark to Open. And then Veteran Guardsmen have just kind of always been an issue to an extent. They just hover around. And I think the spotter changing is just something fairer for gameplay overall. And then for the underperforming teams, obviously terrified of Pathfinder buffs, but I think the best way to buff them without breaking them is buffing the weaker drones. And then for Exaction Squad, they need a lot of said I think I can't remember if I said the dog also needs to hit on freeze. So if I keep forgetting, the dog also needs to hit on freeze. But those changes make them quite good, where they're slightly better into elites, but not dominatingly so it doesn't warp everything else. And then, you know, you've got the buffs for Warp Coven, which is just a nice simple buff. But yeah, you know, we'll see. I was somehow right a lot of the time for the last Balance Dataslate and the Balance Dataslate before that, but I am not a playtester. Really am not, you know. I really am not. Please believe me. And yeah, you know, this is a bit of fun. Please don't get upset, but people will get upset. So, but it's just a nice looking at the stats and see what could happen. You know, there are, once again, there are a lot of kill teams I would want to change, which I haven't mentioned, because I was like, you know what, if GW are using the data as a tool, those are what we might see. But just a bit of fun. And, you know, it's probably too late for them to do anything, you know, because it's releasing so late. But anyway, please remember to like and subscribe and comment. Let me know what you think. Do you agree, disagree? Is there anything I missed? Anything you want to talk about? And remember, I've got a Discord you can check out in the episode description below, as well as an affiliate link to Element Games, as well as a Patreon if you want to give me some more support. And I'll quickly shout out my patrons. So for my Adepts of the Crit, I have Sam, Nicholas, Nick, Mr. Meatwad, Kenzie, John Thomas, Eric, Captain Murder, Dad of Goldens, Ben, Average Joe 27, and Arthur. And then for my Veterans of the Crit, I have Sam. So thank you so much for your support. It really means a lot to me and helps support the channel. But yeah, that's pretty much it for today. A lot of videos this week, right? I need to do some more stuff. Hopefully we should get the Balance Dataslate by the end of June, maybe. You know, be very interesting. Interesting, right? Especially if the Ashes of Faith and Gallowfall kill teams don't get touched, because it'd be weird. Maybe a weird meta going forward. So yeah, I just need to finish off some painting and wait to see what comes next with the meta. But remember, no matter how many times a kill team may get buffed or nerfed, there's always a chance to win as long as you can roll a crit.